Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you to the council. It is wonderful to be here with you. And what I have learned this morning is so exciting. I know we all feel really energized by the incredible changes that have happened so quickly here in Ireland. It's really quite impressive and amazing. So thank you for your focus on universal design in this conference as well. So on the screen, you can see a bit.ly right at the bottom. If you'd like to access this presentation, just go to that. I'm praying up here that it works. But if it should have a link to the presentation, you can follow it along in real time. There are also some extra in the notes to the presentation. There are some extra videos or extra content in case you're interested in learning a little bit more about something that I'm presenting. So I wanted to also make note that in a very universal design for learning way, we've been sitting a long time. I know we just had lunch. I'm in the dreaded post-lunch spot. So I will, thankfully with the lights, I can't tell if you're nodding off in the back. But if you need to do anything to sort of take care of yourself, if you want to stand and listen, if you want to walk and get a coffee, any of those things that help you pay attention or help you focus and engage, please feel free to do that. It can be intimidating, but please feel free to take care of your needs, and you know how you learn best. So we have a couple of goals for today. Great. First, understanding the origins of UDL. We'll talk a little bit about where did this even come from, because it really informs the concept and why we do it. Next, we'll talk about the science of learner variability. Why and what do we know about the brain? We'll also talk about what that means for design, how we can design for equity and efficiency. And then we'll look at the power of policy, a great role that's played in the advisory role by the council, but the ways that policy can influence the settings that we work in and the design. But first, I did want to share a little bit about myself, because I'd love to learn a little bit about you. This is my son, Maxwell. In 2015, we were here in Ireland during the last Rugby World Cup. He became a super fan of rugby, and I am leaving here immediately to go to buy a rugby jersey for your current team. If you have any, I cannot return to the States without that jersey. So if you have any tips on where I might be able to get one, please let me know, because he's much bigger now and the little one doesn't fit him any longer. He also is a student with ADHD. He has in the United States what we call a Section 504 plan. So we have a 504 plan and an individual education plan. And he receives several different accommodations, like extra time on tests and preferential seating and lots of different ways that he interacts in what you would say is a mainstream school. So we have good first-hand experience in some ways as a parent as well. And a little bit about CAST. You heard a little bit about the organization that I run. We lead, inspire, and convene a global community. We just rewrote our mission statement, so it's not rolling off my tongue like I would love it to, but a global community to design equitable, inclusive learning experiences using our universal design for learning framework. And I wanted to mention the word framework here. You could think of it as an approach. I bet a lot of you are already incorporating universal design into your work. So I wonder if you would, just by a show of hands, let me know a little bit about who you are. So do we have parents or caregivers in the audience? Okay, I see a couple of hands. Teachers or specialists? Great, that's the bulk. School leaders? Wonderful. And any policymakers? I know we have a couple, yes. Wonderful, thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate it, it's helpful as we think about moving forward. And I wanted to say from this morning, the incredible focus put on inclusive education is more of an attitude than legislation or policies. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do we have an attitudinal change toward the way we design education? So the origins of UDL lead us in that direction. So these two individuals, David Rose and Anne Meyer, founded CAST. David has spoken here in Ireland many times over the years. He's a professor at Harvard. Both of them are neuroscientists. And they came together just outside of Boston, in a clinic, actually, and they said, we have a theory about education that we're going to test. And that is, students are not broken. Learning environments are not well designed. And this is kind of a revolutionary thought in a sense, right? Because a lot of us have thought, this student is just lazy. This student is just, they don't want to pay attention, right? They're just doing this on purpose. But actually, their theory was maybe the environment, which we can change, is what needs to change, and the student will become more engaged. And so we sometimes have a hard time accepting that when it comes to school. But we accept it very readily in other areas of our life. I'm a practicing gardener. I don't seek to murder plants, but unfortunately, I'm not great at, but I keep trying. But I never blame the plant, right? I move it into the sun. I move it out of the sun. I change its environment. I do this very readily. It's my first instinct. And yet in our schools, it's not necessarily our first instinct. Somehow our attitude is, the child must change. We've got a rigid way we're doing it. We've always done it this way. I did it. I walked 12 miles in the snow. You will walk 12 miles. But interestingly, in 1984, when they were forming CAST and when they had this theory, was also the year that the first personal computer came out. So they had this great ability to use technology to make environments more flexible. Now, universal design for learning is sometimes thought of only as technology, and that's wrong, right? But technology is one way that all of us use constantly to change our environment and make things more however we want them, right? So they brought 9 students into their lab. They were at a clinic at that time. And these were students with very significant, both cognitive and physical disabilities. And they started experimenting with and inventing ways to use technology to make the environment more accommodating for those students. And indeed, it worked. Here is an example. This is a photograph of Carolyn Horvitz. She was one of the first 9. She was born in 1988 with severe quadriplegic cerebral palsy and profound deafness. She started at CAST at the age of 6. In the many, many ways that she was absolutely a student researcher, I would call her, right? We talked a lot about our teacher researchers. She was absolutely a part of the process with our CAST team. The work they did through technology led her to great places. She got a bachelor's from a university in the United States called Mount Holyoke College, a very esteemed university, and she has a double master's from Simmons College in archaeology. These were things that at that time, her parents thought were impossible for her to achieve, right? It seemed impossible. In fact, that might have been why they were so willing to sort of work with people from Harvard at that time who were very interested in trying to find new ways to unlock what we know is the potential within all of us. And so these 9 students and the success that David and Anne had with them led them to say, what we're seeing here, how do we translate this to everybody? And to do that, to reach that scale, they looked at 3 different fields: architecture, brain science, neuroscience, and technology. And based on their work there, they developed the Universal Design for Learning framework or approach. It is a model that's based on the 3 major learning networks of the brain: affective, recognition, and strategic. These 3 networks are in all of our brains, but in very, very different ways. And so this slide has lots and lots of text on it. I'm sorry for that, but there are links in the presentation where you can go and kind of examine. But this is basically a description of the framework and those networks. And it's the 3 ways that you have to think about engaging people as you are speaking with them. So there's multiple means of engagement, and we'll have a lot of concrete examples of that from our panel discussion and the discussion following mine. So multiple ways that you're presenting information to your class. There are multiple ways of engaging students. You're offering them many options, and there are multiple ways that they can act and express. So what you're getting with all of those, the whole multiple ways, is choices, options. It's building in a lot of a flexible and dynamic structure. Indeed, universal design for learning is an approach to teaching and learning for all students that optimizes teaching and learning by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating the barriers that we often cannot see, and proactively designing to minimize them. So the foundational concepts are very simple. The barrier is in the environment, not the child. Variability is the norm, and we're going to talk about that next, and it's contextual. And the goal of UDL is expert learning. And what do we mean by expert learning? Expert is being an expert in yourself. It is to raise students who know how they learn best, who know how to get that information. Because once they go to university, once they go to jobs, as they move on, right, they control their learning. So the goal is to make sure they know what they need and how to get it. So let's talk a little bit about the science behind learner variability. So the foundational concept is simply variability is the norm. And this is what science has told us. Incredible feats over the last 20 years, basically. Variability is the dominant feature of the nervous system. And our brains are like fingerprints. No 2 brains in this room are alike. Even though we're all sitting at the same tables, you're all looking forward, right? None of you are the same. All of you are experiencing this in a very different way. And there is no such thing as an average brain. In the United States, we have a system that is basically formed on the premise that there are some people who will have more needs. There are some people who are very bright, right, and have needs of that type. And then there's a big mushy mass in the middle. Pretty much everybody's the same. That could not be further from the truth. Each person in this room has a brain that's as different as a fingerprint. Our old view of the brain was very much, there is a person who has a disability, they are dyslexic, or they are normal, right? That is an old view of the brain. We know so much more about how our brains work and how we learn. And as educators, especially as educators, we have to respond to this. But I would say employers are reaching out to CAST at the same rate. Anyone who's designing learning experiences across the lifespan is focused on these things. And I'm sure you've seen the fMRI images of the brain. This is one that is particularly beautiful. But we have in our many of our research universities mapped thousands of children's brains. This is a brain map right here. And we have very distinctive evidence. These are trends that show dyslexia. These are trends that show other types of things happening in the brain. They're all different. But that variability is something you can count on when you walk into a room. So before you even get into a classroom, you know for sure that no 2 students in that room are going to learn in the same way. And so variability is the term used to describe just how unique and varied our brains are. No 2 students are learning in the same way. And that can be unbelievably overwhelming, I think, as an educator. Will I have to personalize for 30 different students? How will I do that? And that is what the Universal Design for Learning framework helps with. It's a design thinking framework that helps you anticipate barriers in the classroom and design your lesson plans, all different things that we'll talk about, to reach as many students as possible in an efficient and equitable way. How many people have tried a Rubik's Cube? Anybody? Has anybody solved it? Probably everybody has. I'm the only one. I see a couple of people. I have never solved it. I have thrown it across the room thousands of times. I have never solved it. However, I was surprised to know, or to learn, there are an infinite number of ways to solve it. I assumed there was one way. Like, I'm just not getting that right path, like a puzzle with pieces. No, there are an infinite number of ways. So imagine if you said, we must start, the only way to do it, you have to solve the yellow side first. If you solve the yellow side first, you'll take the next 10 steps. You would be losing out on all of the other potential ways that unique individuals have found to solve the Rubik's Cube. And that is actually what we need as we look forward at huge issues like climate change, huge issues, right? We need lots of different skills and lots of different strengths. We're here in this incredible facility. I've never seen hurling. The second I get to YouTube, I'm getting into that. I mean, I cannot wait. It looks amazing. But here it is happening, and I can guarantee you that not one of the coaches of any of the hurling teams wants every player to have the exact same profile, right? Because the team is working together, and the culture and the context, and who is in one position is impacting others. And that's very much how we live our working lives. And yet in schools, we sometimes don't have the attitude of acceptance with that. Everyone must meet the same standard. Everyone must do these things. But actually, if we're thinking about the incredible environments our students are going into when they work, we have to be thinking that we design for variability. And variability is incredibly contextual. So it is very dependent, circumstance on circumstance. And so you would know this in your own life, right? Because you have certain strengths in certain areas and you have weaknesses in others. So you know that that is completely happening. And we have to be thinking about that as we're educators and designing the environment. That not any student will be a superstar in everything. And so that applies to all students. In one of the ways most recently that we've seen this, context completely matters and disability is situational in some ways. So there's two icons on here, one for Zoom and one for Teams. And we've all been through this pandemic. We hope we're fully through it, I suppose. But we have been through it where most of us overnight started a completely different way of working or teaching or all of those things, right? And in many cases that we have reported in the United States where these stories are coming out, individuals with physical disabilities were taking jobs on Zoom, where you can only see their face, right? You can't see. If you have a physical disability, you couldn't see that. And then they would go into the workplace and people would discover that they were disabled, right? And that reaction is really interesting because did they start to think less of them? Did they have a lot of the stigma? Were they surprised? That whole way that you interact, that we've been taught to think about and socialize what is disability, is immediately apparent in that moment where you realize, wait a minute, how could I have formed this completely different opinion of someone and now have this happen? And that's what I mean by disability is contextual. So when you create a learning environment, you have to think about that as a part of it because variability is predictable. It is predictable. It is in every single one of us, and that's powerful. If we know that, then we know we can design for it. And so I want to talk a little bit about equity and efficiency. First, I love this quote. I worked in policy for many years. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. When I show this quote in the United States, we have very terrible national test scores for reading and math at 4th and 8th grade. And so people get really critical about that. But it's like we have designed a system that is producing these results. But the power of that is we designed it. We did that. So we can change it. And you have the power in your schools and your classrooms to change that. First, equity. More and more, so we're thinking with a disability lens, but I do think it's important to talk about the way the universal design for learning framework helps us also see issues of race, poverty, language, and when we think about designing to maximize all of our brains, we think about equity, or equality, equity, and UDL. So I'm sure most of you have seen this, but I think it's just there's no better sort of representation of this, right? Here's equality. Everybody gets the same box to look over the fence at the game. Everybody gets the same level box. Everybody gets the same thing, right? And so if you just can't see, if you're still too short, if the box doesn't work for you, you don't get to see over the fence. So equity, each gets to their own needs, right? And so now everyone can see over the fence. But UDL's attitude shift would say, why do we have a fence there? Isn't it more, aren't we paying more money to customize all of these things than this one barrier that if we just made it a chain link fence, we'd be able to see through it and everyone would approach it, no one would look different. One of the biggest issues we have in schools, we heard it in one of the stories this morning, students do not want to look different, right, than others, none of us do. And so that is where UDL's attitude shift is. What in your classroom can you change so all students benefit from it? I do want to be very clear. Absolutely, certain students need appropriate interventions. In the United States, we have very strict laws about that, and they have to be there because those students need them. So I am not saying that changing the environment, right, will be absolutely the end-all be-all for this. But I do think it's important to understand that we are more alike than different. And many of the things that we think will help only some, in fact, help all of us. How many people have a phone in this? It's amazing we call it a phone. It's like a powerful mini computer we carry. The least of it, I can't even remember the last time I used it to make a phone call. But, right, you may use Siri. You may use speech to text, right? Wasn't designed for you. So should we say you can't use it? You don't get it. We all use it. It helps make it better. We have examples of this in so many ways. Oh, sorry. Right, automatic doors, not designed for most people, right? Curb cuts, the OG, the original example. Easy grip tools, we all love those, all of these. And closed captioning, right? Not designed for most people and yet enjoyed and used by probably almost everyone. Audiobooks, all of it. And I love this next slide, actually. So this slide, I just love the title of it. The youths love subtitles. I love it. I don't know why, it just makes me laugh. But who is using captioning the most? Gen Z. I am watching my son play a video game and watch a show on his phone. And he's reading the show, and he's playing the game, and he's talking to friends. That is something interesting. When I first was asked this question, I thought it has to be, I thought maybe as you age, there are different things, right? There are ways. No, it is people who are now adapting this to their context. So in the classroom, necessary for some, but good for all. And that's what I'm meaning by the differentiation in that sense, right? Not differentiation in terms of teaching, but in terms of what we are providing. So there's many different ways to do this, but there are 3 process steps, right? Start with your goal. Anticipate barriers, right? You know there's variability, so be ready to design for it, and then think through your options. So in a classroom, what might this look like? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that you're using in that classroom. Materials, methods, assessment, environment. And so you just look around that room and think, wow, what could I manipulate in this, right? And here are some examples, and you're gonna get many more of these from the panels later. And you're using these and doing this probably all the time anyway, right? But there's many, many different parts of the experience and the environment in that classroom that you could change. And so it's one of the things I think to be starting to think, you don't have to change everything overnight, right? But you do need to think about wait a minute, if I want to reach all of those different brains, what is available to me to manipulate? And then you have to really think about the attitudinal shift, right? The language of UDL. How often do we say these things? This student did poorly because she couldn't read well enough to learn the content. That's what we would say now. Well, she can't read well enough to learn that, so that's why she failed that exam. So she's got to learn to read better to be able to get that content. But actually, if we took that and changed it, it would be the student did poorly because the lesson required her to read in order to learn. What's the goal? Is the goal in that lesson, it may be teaching someone to read. If that's the goal, great. But if it's not, then what is the goal? What are you trying, is it learning? If it's learning, do you have to read to get content? How many of you absolutely just pick up, I mean, YouTube is amazing. I learned how to change something on my sink, and I have no experience doing that, right? Amazing what you can learn. And I didn't read a manual to do that. Another way to think of it, Ella cannot pass math because she can't sit still. That is one we hear all the time. Actually, Ella can't pass math because the lessons require her to sit still. But in this case, we're changing the emphasis from blaming the student, you have a fault, you can't sit still. But what we want is for you to learn math. You may be brilliant at math. And if we require you to sit still to learn math, we'll never know. There's a way to change the environment. In policy, we think about efficiency quite a bit, right? We don't want to waste public dollars. We want to make sure they're being used in the best way possible. And I would say in your classrooms, you think constantly about efficiency because teachers have an enormous workload. And so sometimes the thought of having to customize to this level can be very hard. But I think if you focus on the goal, and that's where it starts, then you can think about how to do this in a way that maximizes what you're doing. So think you're excited to throw a dinner party. And what's your real goal? Well, you might say, my goal is just to see all my friends. I want to have my friends there and I want to be with them. So I want to spend time with them, so I'm going to make a lasagna because I can make it ahead and I can serve it, right? Then I can talk to them and I don't have to worry about cooking. Except some of your friends are lactose intolerant. They can't eat that lasagna. Some of them are gluten-free. They can't eat the pasta. And some are vegetarian. So now you have to make 4 lasagnas. Too much, right? You have to change the lasagna. Or by planning in advance and knowing people might be different, you could put out a buffet and let them select what they want. So there are just ways where choices can be a way to customize your instruction. And we think about this a lot with architecture. We see it a lot. We see it everywhere. I've seen it all throughout Dublin as I've been here. And this is just one example of that, where there's a ramp to get up, right? There are also stairs. It's well lit. You may skateboard down it. There's a whole bunch of different ways to move through it. So the attitude shift that I'm arguing is embodied by this quote by an Irish writer, actually, which I use all the time, Jonathan Swift. You should never be ashamed to admit you have been wrong. It only proves that you are wiser today than you were yesterday. So if we change these things, it's not, right, it is an evolution, and it's so exciting to hear about. I've been so impressed with the National Council being able to look at the study this morning and taking a deep look at what is needed, what does need to change. Clearly, there's a lot of people calling for more services, and it's exciting to think you're looking at how can we deliver those in the best way. So a quick 2 last things. First, a case study on teachers. We've done a ton of research at CAST with teachers, as teacher researchers, with students. And one of the things we really looked deeply at, in one of the states we're in, there's several different links to the full study. We've worked with the state of New Hampshire for about 8 years, deeply. And basically, we asked teachers in what ways, if at all, right? How did learning about UDL and applying it to your practice serve to promote your own sense of agency? Because many teachers feel overwhelmed. There are too many frameworks. There are all these things. So this study had almost 800 participants, 65 schools, job-embedded professional learning, went on for years. And the way that teachers talked about it was amazing. They said it gives me permission to teach in new ways. And at the end is the last one that's highlighted. I'm handing over control to students. I'm seeing students in the classroom select how they're going to learn, manipulate their environment. And in fact, we watched that in the video this morning, right? There's a fear that if you give students, if you take away tables, if you change the environment, we'll lose control of the room. But in fact, what you did is you created an environment where they could learn about how they learn, which is what they need. We have all the information we need, right? We definitely need to still teach foundational information and skills, not saying that. But we also have to teach people how to figure out the problems of the future. And so this next slide on artificial intelligence, I almost just laugh putting it up here. Although I did learn, there was recently a conference here in Ireland, the most attended, I believe, 700 teachers attended it, on artificial intelligence. This, I only have one slide on artificial intelligence. I could do a whole day on this. We are looking at this very closely and trying to determine how we can use universal design for learning to create some new technologies with artificial intelligence that can help. And I'm just going to tell you first, I know there are lots of risks, right? I don't want to underestimate those. There's risks with the design of the algorithm. It could keep students out. There's student data privacy concerns. There are legitimate concerns. But if you put them aside for just a minute, there's just two things to talk about. The first is AI is everywhere. Your kids are already, everybody's using it. They are going to need to know how to use it and what it is. The second is people are doing some really cool things with it. So I'm just going to mention one quick thing. We are working with a group that's being funded by a private philanthropy, and they're looking at how can we, if a teacher has 30 students in a classroom, how can we expand the ways that we can personalize for some of those students? And what they're doing is creating technology that aids with critical thinking. So if you had a teacher next to you, you might read a passage or listen to a passage and write an analysis of it. And the teacher might say to you, why did you compare and contrast these two things? Why did you move this to this second paragraph? Why did you make the decision to focus on this quote and not the other? And if a teacher had time to do that for 30 students, that would be astounding, right? But the technology is at a place where it can start to push those questions and students answer the questions. It then gathers the data and gives it to the student, or the teacher, excuse me. So the teacher can start to see trend data. They can see things for each student. What do I need to reteach? What did they not get? Right? We do this already in many classrooms. You know, are you learning it? Thumbs up. Are you not learning it? Thumbs down. We're trying to consistently assess students so that teachers have more information about, is what I'm doing making impact? And there's some really exciting things in technology that are possibly useful in this way. But I did give all the caveats, right, about all the negative stuff too. So finally, the power of policy. So in the United States, we have several federal education laws, and they do now include universal design for learning. And that has been a major policy lever. In addition, states are using universal design for learning throughout their frameworks to varying degrees. Different states are further ahead and have accepted or adopted this more than others. So we have good examples of the ways that policy can push forward different types of initiatives. Here in Ireland, and I want to give a hat tip to Mags Flood at Maynooth University, but this is her slide, and she is doing a lot of great work in universal design for learning, as are many people here. But there are two places where it does appear in the national curriculum. And it's really interesting to see that in one of them, it says designed to be as universal as is feasible. And I think that's a really inviting way to say, start with something, right? Start in a way, don't become overwhelmed by, I have to change everything in my classroom now. But you are a teacher researcher, right? Many of the people in here are teachers and school leaders. By far, that's the most. Start with something. There are many different ways you can manipulate the environment, and you can test and learn, and all of those will lead to structuring in a much stronger way. And there's so much internal learning going on within Ireland that is amazing. And so I'm excited to see kind of what we all learn together. And in fact, we hope to come up with some Irish-specific examples that at CAST we can put on our website and offer and share throughout. And then there's UDL globally. UDL over the last probably 10 years. It was adopted by UNESCO. It's been adopted by USAID. We saw this presentation this morning going through the many, many different ways that we embrace and push forward UDL in the global environment. And at CAST, we are absolutely inundated with requests from around the world to help design universal design for learning environments there, and largely because of the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education. This means something different everywhere, but this has really pushed many different countries to push us forward in thinking about design. And I would say that in each of these environments, we're learning more and more about the context that we're in, and that is informing. The United States is a very specific context, and while universal design for learning began there, it was worked on in many different areas, but that environment isn't entirely representative for sure. And so it's exciting to think that we could partner with people here in Ireland. Let's look at some examples of how is it working within your system, right? We're working with several countries in Africa, much different environment. A country where there's basically, one of the places we're working, there are 200 students in a room. The floors are dirt. And one of the first things they're doing is through singing and music. And that is a way that they're redesigning the way they deliver education. And so I think that's going to only open it up for all of us, right? There will be many different ways that we can move forward and learn from each other. In the contexts that are coming here, there are many refugees, there are many immigrants coming in there. We are more and more a diverse and global world. And so having this experience is really broadening the scope for all of us. So I actually want to end with a little bit of time for you to think about and reflect. I would love to know if anything in there resonated with you. I know there's varying levels of use and of UDL in the room. I know some people may have never heard of it. Some people may be deeply entrenched in it and working with it every day. But I'd love to know what resonated with you. What questions you have. Of course, there's time for that. But I'd really love to know what surprised you or what you disagree with. What is an action that you can take? What is something you can do to change the experience and the environment if you are so inclined? So with that, I would say thank you again to the council. It is exciting to be here. I've learned so much, and I would easily move to questions. Thank you.